Neal Stephenson is a very talented writer. He's written Snow Crash, The Diamond Age, and Cryptonomicon. All have won multiple awards, including a Hugo Award back when that actually meant something. He's great at writing both science fiction and historical fiction novels. But one day in June 2012, he decided to make the leap to video games with Clang, a realistic sword-fighting game with a strong historic setting and narrative. It's the kind of setting Stephenson is great at, and it's not like he's developing the game by himself. What could go wrong? This is my dog Cam. He's great at eating my other dogs, Jake, crap. He's great at coming inside and licking his butt, and every time he gets a drink of water he splashes half of it on the floor. He's fantastic at being a dog. Oh, and Jake's okay, I guess. But Cam is the best around. One day, he decided he was going to try and be a bird, and jumped off my parents' back porch. He's great, so what could go wrong? Well, there was the whole thing about him not being able to fly, what with him being a dog, and an overweight one at that. Yeah, it failed spectacularly, as you can imagine, a lot like development of Clang. Hey, that's fine, we all make mistakes from time to time. The thing is, most of us don't have a $500,000 mistake, blowing all of our backers' money on a broken mess of a game. A broken mess, by the way, that never got released because it was so awful. And this isn't me editorializing, this comes straight from Stephenson's mouth. Over 2 years after the Kickstarter launched, on September 18th, 2014, Stephenson sorrowfully announced the cancellation of Clang. Last year, Supertai Corporation delivered the Clang prototype and other donor rewards as promised. The prototype was technically innovative, but it wasn't very fun to play. This is for various reasons. Some of these were beyond our control. Others are my responsibility in that I probably focused too much on historical accuracy and not enough on making it sufficiently fun to attract additional investment. In all honesty, it's likely the least infuriating passage from this final update, and I didn't even back the campaign. It all began on a dark and stormy night. It was raining cliches, and a certain author was growing fed up with how sword fighting in video games worked. He decided to do something about it. Thus, months later, he co-founded Supertai Corporation to work, amongst other things, on video games. So his first game would be Clang, or Clang! As it's stylized as. As well as heavily pushing his own involvement, the game was described as the perfect sword-fighting simulation using motion controls. Despite Stephenson's involvement, the game would start as a 1v1 multiplayer-only arena-type deal. Eventually, the story would be added in as development went on. You see, this is where things get interesting. There isn't much information about Clang, I'm gonna stop doing that now, on the page. Most of what's on there now was added over the course of several months after it had already funded. They're update videos. What was on the page were just walls of text detailing the narrative, a line of short stories, and what the game would possibly be like. We'll come back to those short stories, don't you worry about that, but for now, let's look at what was presented. Okay, here we have the campaign. I'll scroll down so you can see all of it. From about this sword graphic here up is the original presentation. Everything below are the updates. Remember, this Kickstarter launched before the mandatory risks and challenges rule was adopted, so there is no set section here. Now, why they put those updates on the main page like that, I'm not sure. Possibly to make it look like there was more info on the page to begin with, but who knows. So there's a video that shows off other games, and there's this, whatever it's supposed to be. There's the pitch video, which is just all kinds of weird, honestly. It shows Stephenson sitting at a desk, people ripping apart his set, the cutting to what is possibly my favorite part of a Kickstarter pitch video ever, random shots of development of motion capture, animation, and people typing with the tag development stuff, as if they had no clue what they were talking about. There's no real coherent gameplay shown, just quick cuts of a medley of, well, development stuff. From there, we see people sitting at computers, people practicing sword fighting, some guy sitting on a couch with Stephenson having no idea how to hold a controller, a guy balancing a pole on his face as he walks by, Stephenson handing one of the guys on the sofa some kind of stick with electronic stuff on one end, and it just goes on like this. We get a brief look of actual gameplay towards the end, but it kinda just looks like a regular sword fighting game. It's hardly some revolutionary new gameplay that'll change the history of gaming like it's made out to be. Below that is the information about the game. It talks about Stephenson hating sword fighting, and then it delves into the story for a couple of sentences. Well, that's not strictly true. The paragraph starts by talking about the gameplay, where it mentions Clang will start life as a one-on-one arena fighter. And that's seemingly where Stephenson, or whoever wrote this, realized the draw of the game was supposed to be Stephenson's writing. The short stories I mentioned are casually thrown out at this point, being co-produced by 47 North and Amazon, everybody! Make sure you go to thatthereamazon.com for all the latest hot deals, like on Stephenson's books! They promise to reinforce the backstory and narrative of Clang, eventually being merged seamlessly together, after Clang gets its narrative in place, that is. How will this be different from Soul Calibur, you ask? Asked no one but the Kickstarter page. Low latency, high precision motion controller. Critical to a satisfying sword fight is fast, accurate response. This is especially important for Clang, given the depth and complexity of moves that are used in real sword arts. Initially, Clang will make use of a commercial third-party off-the-shelf controller that anyone can buy today. What you may actually be asking is for what motion controllers does Clang work with? Well, not the Kinect, Wii, or Move. As Subotai points out, they don't have unlimited resources, and thus cannot get the game to the 3 most popular forms of motion control. Instead, they have their own recommendation. Hi, Billy Mays here with the Subotai Corporation. We are big fans of 6 Sense technology as embodied in the Razer Hydra controller. The engineering team at 6 Sense has found a way to make an extremely high-resolution, low-latency controller by making ingenious use of simple and inexpensive components. It slices, it dices, it even works as a controller some of the time. What are you waiting for? Call now! This isn't what you think. This definitely, absolutely, positively is not whatsoever an ad for anything at all. Really. It's not marketing. Who said it was? Depth. Roundhouse swings and crude blocks just aren't enough. Real sword fighting involves multiple attacks delivered from different stances, pommel strikes, grappling, feints, and parries. Expandability. Implementing the longsword style will oblige us to construct a toolkit that can then be used by us or by others to create other examples of what we're calling maces, martial arts system embodiments. If your thing is Japanese kenjutsu or Viking sword and board, then in principle Clang should support it. Notice the in principle and should there. Subotai does state at the very end of the page that they're seeking funds to make a prototype that they will use to seek further funding. This is totally fine when it's disclosed, but it's only mentioned at the very end of the page. Up until that point, it's heavily implied that they're looking to fully fund the game. Several reward tiers state that you'll be getting the game, not a demo or a prototype. It's easy to get that impression when you watch the video and already see gameplay, so you'd think that was the prototype, but apparently not. Nevertheless, after a month, Clang was fully funded, and the development stuff got underway, or continued, rather. It got off on the wrong foot instantly when an update announced they screwed up a survey, likely the one posted in the updates earlier about t-shirts. It was backer only, because of course it was, so what exactly it was about is hard to say. It might not really matter all that much, but it really set the tone for what was to be 2 years of pure agony. A demo was released in April 2013, and a few sporadic updates provided some news about development, but for the most part Clang remained ironically silent. When a new update was posted on September 18th, 2014, it would prove to be the actual final post. After running into financial trouble, Clang failed to find additional funding and had been cancelled. Members of the team made large personal contributions of time and money to the project before, during, and after the Kickstarter phase. Some members, when all this is said and done, absorbed significant financial losses. I am one of them. That has been my way of taking responsibility for this. In the end, however, additional fundraising efforts failed and forced the team to cut their losses and disband in search of steady work. Yes, it's the typical developer sob story about how they spread themselves too thin, they let their big ambitions hijack their original small ideas, they funded the game themselves, but ultimately it just wasn't enough. There's an added twist this time, though. Almost a year to the day prior to this update, September 19th, 2013, Stephenson announced that Clang would be going on hiatus while they get their funding situation sorted out. We stretched the Kickstarter money farther than we expected to, this announcement read. Questioning a Kickstarter's finances are usually counterproductive. Games are expensive, and Kickstarter fees, rewards, and taxes eat up a huge chunk of that dollar amount. That's not even mentioning other business stuff like paying staff, electrical bills, any licensing fees, and all that boring stuff no one ever talks about in game development. But you can't help but wonder what the hell happened. They had some kind of marketing thing going on with Razer, obviously. They got $500,000, and they were headed up by an international best-selling author. And all they were working on was a prototype. How can you blow over $500,000, remember Stephenson said he and his team put his own money into it, on a prototype? That shouldn't be possible, especially not on the indie development level. Stephenson then had the gall to say that publishers weren't interested and points to the closure of THQ and LucasArts. Here's the kicker though. Lessons learned. Kickstarter lock-in. Kickstarter is amazing, but one of the hidden catches is that once you've taken a bunch of people's money to do a thing, you have to actually do that thing, and not some other thing that you thought of in the meantime. You what? You what? Hidden catch? That's the whole conceit of Kickstarter! I'm sorry, I try not to let my own personal feelings get in the way, or let these videos devolve into another dude yelling on the internet, but this guy is a real piece of work, and it's only going to get worse from here. Fast forward a year to the final update, and you get the biggest load of shit so far. Yeah, so much for my personal feelings not getting in the way, huh? As all of this was happening, new ideas and opportunities presented themselves. These reflect a lot of experience that was gained and connections to the industry that were made during that project. Although these ideas and opportunities may ultimately wind up in some of the same places we wanted to take Clang, they will do so in non-obvious ways, by starting from a clean sheet of paper in each case, building new teams, and pursuing projects that in some cases have no obvious connection to historical sword fighting. Like run-on sentences, for example. I've delayed talking about these projects for a long time, because I kept thinking that at least one of them would reach a point where I could describe it in something other than generalities. I apologize for that delay. But now a year has passed since the last update, and I've decided that it is cleaner and simpler to cut the cord, and announce the termination of Clang. Future announcements can then happen in their own good time, giving any new projects a fresh start. That's right, while both Clang and Subutai Corporation were falling apart, his team members pushing their own funds into the game, Stephenson was busy testing new ideas, which he insists will be shown one day. Spoiler alert, it's been almost 2 years since this post and nothing has come of it. He comes across as so smug and unapologetic, talking about how it's easier to cut the cord and blame anyone and everyone but himself, no matter what he says. Oh yeah, he says he partially blames himself, but he's the one in charge, and all he's done up to this point is show us a weird pitch video, take a year to get a demo out, go silent for another year, blame publishers for not wanting your self-proclaimed boring game, claim Kickstarter has hidden catches, then pull the plug because a new shiny toy caught your attention. The icing on the cake is when he mentions refunds. By combing through comment threads and emails, we have identified around 24 Clang backers who have asked for refunds. Those have already been processed. These people have their money back, around $700 altogether. Only those 24 people got refunds. What of everyone else, you ask? Other backers may now opt in to a list called Reverb, from which future announcements will be made about upcoming projects. It is possible that these projects will one day yield bonus rewards for Clang backers, but no guarantees can be made on that front, since these projects are just getting off the ground, and will likely involve entities other than Subutai Corporation. My recommendation is that you sign up for the list. That's right, you get to sign up for a mailing list. Congratulations. I hope you look forward to more ads for Razer and nothing else, because, like I said, nothing has come from Subutai since this update. Stephenson and Subutai can say that they were trying to only make a prototype to pitch all along, but the fact of the matter is the campaign was meant to pitch a game, not a prototype. There was only one throwaway line at the very end mentioning that they were building something to show publishers, and all previous information was pitching what would become a full-fledged game. They likely weren't actively trying to deceive people, but that's exactly what happened with their misinformation and bad delivery. And yes, Kickstarter is, of course, a risk every time, but it should only be a risk in so much as the developers staying within their scope and running out of money, or that they didn't know what they were doing to begin with. Here, it appears nothing happened. Looking at what was shown in the initial pitch video and the final bit of gameplay we saw, there's virtually no difference. Where was the story that was promised? For something that was so heavily hyped, Stephenson's writing, where was it? Where was any of his characters, his story, his award-winning writing, any hint of it whatsoever? Just gone, just doesn't exist. It's easy to criticize a failed campaign after the fact with the benefit of perfect hindsight, but this? How was this funded? I said in my last video, the David Hayter one, that Kickstarter backers weren't idiots and that they wouldn't back any old project that came along just because of a big name and a marquee. Does Clang prove that sentiment wrong? Of course not. Clang came around in mid-2012, only months after Double Fine brought crowdfunding to the forefront of the gaming community with Broken Age. People didn't know what this here crowded funding thing was about. It was easy for people to throw up a campaign with nothing but an idea, something Double Fine themselves did. But things have changed since then. As time went by, crowdfunding projects grew more advanced and the platform changed. I already mentioned the risks and challenges section becoming mandatory on Kickstarter, but there were also other changes like the use of stretch goals and, well, the weaponization of nostalgia. As the scene got more crowded, no pun intended, developers had to do more to compete, so more and more developers started coming to the table with gameplay videos, screenshots, a talented voice cast, behind-the-scenes video that was more in-depth than just development stuff. If Stephenson and Subotai tried running this same campaign today, they would have been laughed off the internet, let alone Kickstarter. Especially with their short story nonsense. Yes, those Amazon and 47 Ronin or whatever it was called short stories were pushed heavily throughout the campaign and the updates. They've since been removed as far as I can tell, but they stayed up for a while. Now, I know better than to suggest that an award-winning international best-selling author needs Kickstarter to sell a few books, but it's clear he was after more than just realizing his dream of a game with good sword fighting in it. This was clearly going to be some kind of big intermedia thing with books and video games and maybe even more. As a last aside, let me say one thing. Despite what I was implying throughout this video, Clang didn't fail simply because Neal Stephenson is a writer, and not even necessarily because he doesn't have any game development experience. Like I said, it's not like he was developing the game alone, he had a team of people. I also don't mean to say that you should stay in your lane. If you're a garbage collector and you want to make a video game, then knock your socks off. Best of luck to you, I hope it goes well. But you shouldn't ask for $500,000 for it while pretending to know what you're doing just because you're good at something else. It just doesn't work that way. Real sword fighting involves multiple attacks delivered from different stances, pommel strikes, grappling, feints, and parries. Expandability. Implementing the longsword style will oblige us to construct a toolkit that can be then used... Shit. If your thing is Japanese kenjutsu or Viking sword and broad... If your thing is Japanese kenjutsu or Viking sword and board, then in principle, Clang should support it. If your thing is Japanese kenjutsu or If your thing is Japanese kenjutsu or Viking sword and board, then in principle, Clang should support it. Kenjutsu doesn't screw me up, it's board. Yep, that sounds about right.